Hello Americans channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
Man visits pregnant wife in hospital, then this note changed everything. This man thought he and his wife were simply getting ready for the birth of their baby daughter, a beautiful moment that had been 9 months in the making. But all that changed when he noticed a small note on her beside the table. It seemed like nothing, but when he opened the paper, his face instantly turned pale. Ashley shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed, letting out a slow breath. The contractions were mild for now, but the anticipation was unbearable. Brendan sat beside her, rubbing slow circles on her hand. It could still take hours, she sighed. I know, he said, forcing a smile. But you're doing great. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of machines. Ashley's stomach growled, making her groan. I swear, I can't go through this on an empty stomach, she muttered. Brendan chuckled. I don't blame you. That hospital food looks like it was made in a science experiment. She smirked. Then go get me something edible. Brendan leaned forward, teasingly. Anything in particular, or do I have to guess? Ashley rolled her eyes. You already know. The chicken sandwich from Subway, just the way I like it. He grinned. Of course, kissing her forehead, he stood up. I'll be back before you know it. She nodded, giving his hand a quick squeeze. Stepping out into the hospital hallway, Brendan inhaled deeply. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air, a sharp contrast to the familiar, homely scent of their car as he slid inside. His hands tightened around the wheel. This was it. Soon they'd be parents. He shook off the nerves and drove off. The roads were nearly empty, a rare sight. The quiet hum of the car radio filled the space as Brendan's mind raced. Was he ready? Could he be the father Ashley and their baby deserved? He shook his head. There was no room for doubt now. He just had to focus on getting back quickly. Arriving at the small Subway shop near their home, Brendan parked and stepped inside. The familiar smell of fresh bread and roasted chicken filled the air. He placed the order quickly, tapping his fingers against the counter. The cashier handed over the neatly wrapped sandwich, and he thanked them hurriedly. I have to get back. Brendan pulled out his wallet, fishing out a few bills. His stomach growled in response to the food in his hand, but he ignored it. Ashley was the priority. Here you go, he said, handing over the money. The cashier smiled as they handed back his change. Hope she enjoys it, the employee added. Sliding the sandwich into a paper bag, Brendan turned on his heel, eager to get back. He pictured Ashley's relieved smile as she unwrapped it, the simple comfort of a favorite meal making the waiting easier. He pushed open the shop's door, stepping into the cool evening air. Almost there. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He barely noticed at first, distracted by the thought of getting back to Ashley. Fishing it out, he glanced at the screen. The words sent a jolt through his chest. Incoming call, hospital. His breath caught. Something must be wrong, he thought. Brendan's pulse quickened as he swiped to answer. Hello? His voice came out more urgent than he intended. On the other end, the doctor's calm but firm tone sent a shiver through him. Mr. Lawson, your wife's dilation progressed much faster than expected. Contractions are closer together. You should return immediately. His stomach dropped. Wait, what? Already he struggled to process it. Hours, they had said. He was supposed to have time. Yes, the doctor confirmed. We estimate she'll be in active labor within 30 minutes. You need to get here soon. Brendan swallowed hard. I'm on my way, he said, barely hearing his own voice. Shoving the phone into his pocket, he sprinted toward the car, heart pounding. This was happening. Now, his fingers fumbled as he yanked the door open, tossing the bag onto the passenger seat. A sharp inhale steadied him barely. He jammed the key into the ignition, hands gripping the wheel. The engine roared to life as he pulled out of the lot, tires screeching slightly. His mind raced as fast as the car. Ashley needed him. She was alone, about to give birth, and he was still minutes away. Come on, he muttered, pressing his foot down harder on the gas pedal. Streetlights blurred past as he sped through the near-empty roads. His fingers tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. The hospital wasn't far, but every second felt like an eternity. He couldn't miss this. He wouldn't. The sandwich bag crinkled beside him as he swerved into the next turn, racing toward Ashley. Brendan raced into the hospital parking lot, barely registering the screech of his tires. He threw the car into park, flung the door open, and sprinted toward the entrance. The sandwich on the passenger seat was forgotten, left to sit in the rising heat. Right now, nothing else mattered. He had to get to Ashley. His breath came in quick bursts as he darted through the hospital doors. My wife, Ashley Lawson, where is she? He panted at the front desk. The nurse barely had time to respond before he took off toward her room, feet pounding against the tiled floor. His heart pounded harder with every step. Brendan practically crashed into the doorframe as he reached Ashley's room. Inside, the doctors were already there, preparing her for the move. She looked up, face flushed, eyes filled with a mix of pain and relief. "You made it," she whispered, exhaling as another contraction hit. "Of course I did," he said, rushing to her side. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Just 1 second," he pleaded with the doctors. "I just need to tell her something." One of them sighed but nodded. Brendan turned back to Ashley, brushing her hair away from her damp forehead. "I love you," he said firmly. "I'll be with you the whole way." Ashley's lips formed into a smile. "I love you too," she whispered. Brendan kissed her forehead, holding her in the room for just a second longer. But then something caught his eye. On the small bedside table beside Ashley lay a neatly folded note. It hadn't been there earlier, and Brendan wondered what it was. He couldn't help but stare at it, wondering who had left it or what was written on it. He wanted to ask his wife casually about it, but before he could open his mouth, the doctors intervened. "We have to go now," one of them said firmly. "It's time." Ashley groaned through another contraction. Brendan nodded, not wanting to delay the clearly painful upcoming labor over a small, insignificant note. He kept quiet and smiled politely as the nurses surrounded Ashley's bed. They unclipped the brakes on the rolling system and started moving Brendan's wife out of the room. Brendan was free to come with them and observe the delivery, even being present to support his wife beside her. Of course, he wanted to do so, and he stated that he would follow in just a second. After that, the doctor left the room to rejoin the nursing staff in the hallway. Brendan spoke those words confidently, knowing he wanted to be there with his wife for the entire process, but before he could do that, he wanted to know what was written on that bedside table note. He reached out his arm and unfolded the piece of paper on his lap. There were only a few sentences written on there, but all of those words combined changed the trajectory of this poor man's life forever. Brendan stared at the now open doorway where his wife had just rolled through and then back at the note in his hand. What the hell? Brendan's face was pale as a sheet just moments after reading this mysterious message. Who left this for Ashley? And why would this person do that? There was an unnerving feeling welling inside Brendan's chest, and he did not like it. He knew he had to get up and follow his wife to the labor room, but Brendan could not get his body to move an inch from his hospital chair. The note completely consumed his thoughts, blocking everything else that went on around him, including his wife, who was going to give birth to their child. Something was clearly wrong, and Brendan needed to know its extent. While Brendan lingered in her old room, Ashley was almost at the delivery room. Her face was pointed forward, wanting to go into labor as soon as possible since the contractions hurt quite a bit. She thought Brendan was walking just a few feet behind the group of nurses, not realizing he was nowhere around. The hallway stretched ahead of her, bright hospital lights casting long shadows on the floor. Ashley winced, her free hand gripping the bedrail as another contraction hit. "Almost there," one of the nurses said to calm her mind. The white uniformed woman even let Ashley squeeze her hand. "You're doing amazing," the woman said, and Ashley nodded with a slight tremble. The delivery room loomed ahead, doors wide open, awaiting her arrival. A team of nurses and doctors was already inside, preparing for the final stage of this expecting woman's 9 months of pregnancy. Ashley groaned as the bed hit a small crevice in the floor before entering the room, her face contorted in discomfort. She still felt supported since Ashley thought Brendan was jogging behind her hospital bed. Finally, Ashley reached the delivery room. The doctors maneuvered Ashley's bed inside, preparing her for what was to come. But when after the bed brakes were again locked into place, and the swirl of nurses fixing her bed's position spread out, Ashley suddenly realized that a very important person was missing. "Where's Brendan? Where's my husband?" The nurses looked at each other and then scanned the room. They admitted that they also thought he was walking behind them, but that wasn't the case at all. In fact, Brendan was not even inside the hospital anymore. He was back in his car, taking a bite of the already damp sandwich he left behind in the car, all the while staring at the note on his dashboard. Brendan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His mind raced as he drove, the note still burning in his pocket. He should be at the hospital with Ashley, but he couldn't shake that the note gave him. So instead, he sped toward home, his heart pounding harder with every passing second. Pulling into the driveway, Brendan barely took the time to shut off the engine before rushing inside. He grabbed his laptop from the couch and opened it with shaky hands. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally typed in the name of Ashley's doctor. He needed to know who this man really was. At first, everything seemed normal. The doctor had impressive credentials, attended prestigious schools, and was highly regarded in the medical community. Articles praised his skill and dedication to patient care. But Brendan wasn't looking for the obvious. He scrolled further, searching for anything buried beneath the polished reputation. It took a little time, but eventually he found something, a discussion forum buried deep in the search results. The title of the thread made his stomach clench. Dr. R. Owen, The Truth Behind the Mask. His pulse quickened as he clicked on it. Dozens of posts filled the page, telling a different story. People shared cryptic warnings and strange experiences. Some claimed they couldn't prove anything, but knew something was wrong. Others hinted at strange appearances of Dr. Owen at their house and lingering doubts ever since they visited the hospital. One post, in particular, stood out. A woman named Dana left her phone number, asking for anyone with information to call. Brendan hesitated for only a second before dialing the number. His hands were clammy, his breath shallow. The phone rang 3 times before a woman picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, almost tired. Brendan cleared his throat. Hi, my name is Brendan Lawson. I think I need to talk to you." There was silence on the other end before Dana spoke again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not you too," she muttered. Brendan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" he asked urgently. The woman let out a shaky breath. "You're not the first. Families have been trying to expose him for years." Brendan's grip on the phone tightened. "Expose him? So it's all true?" He could hear Dana swallow hard. "It's complicated, but he needs to be stopped before he does this to more families. I'm sorry you had to be one of them." Dana's voice was filled with urgency. "Is he at the hospital now?" she asked. Brendan's blood ran cold. Ashley was in labor right now, and Dr. Owen was with her. His heart pounded in his chest. "My wife," he said, voice shaking. "She's at the hospital, and she's in labor." Dana's breath hitched. "Then you don't have time," she said quickly. "You need to go back. But you shouldn't go alone." Brendan ran a hand through his hair. "What do you mean?" he asked. Dana was already answering. "There are other families, others who know what he's done. We've been trying to bring attention to this for years. And I think we have enough evidence now to make a difference. They can't ignore us anymore." Brendan's thoughts were racing. Ashley was there, about to give birth, and here he was talking to strangers on the phone about some conspiracy surrounding her doctor. But something in Dana's voice told him this was real. "Can you get people together?" he asked. "As many as possible. I need to go now." Dana didn't hesitate. "I'll call everyone I can. We will meet you at the hospital in 20 minutes. Brendan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Okay," he said. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was bigger than he'd imagined. But if there was any truth to it, he couldn't stand by. He ended the call and took a deep breath. His mind was a mess, but one thing was clear: he had to get back to Ashley. He shoved his phone into his pocket and grabbed his car keys. Time was running out, and he refused to let her go through this alone. Brendan stepped outside, locking the door behind him. The air felt heavier now, thick with tension. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he wasn't turning back. With one last glance at the house, he climbed into the car, ready to return to the hospital and uncover the truth. Turning the key in the ignition, he took a steadying breath. The engine roared to life, and with a determined grip on the wheel, he pulled out of the driveway. His wife was waiting for him, and this time he wouldn't let anything or anyone keep him from reaching her. Brendan made sure to reach the hospital within the recorded time. He already drove at the law's limit when he heard Ashley was fully dilated. But now Brendan was sure he broke a few speeding limits. His headlights illuminated the road ahead, but his mind was elsewhere. Ashley was in labor and he had to be there. But just as importantly, he had to stop Dr. Owen. While Brendan drove toward the hospital, Ashley clenched her bed sheets in the delivery room. The contractions were coming fast now, each one sending sharp waves of pain through her body. A nurse wiped her forehead. "It's time, Ashley. You need to push soon." But Ashley shook her head desperately. "No," she gasped. "Not yet. Where is my husband?" The nurses exchanged glances, their expressions sympathetic. "He should be here any minute," one reassured her. "But the baby isn't waiting." Another contraction hit, and Ashley squeezed the nurse's hand tightly. "Please," she begged through clenched teeth. "Someone get Brendan. She couldn't do this without him." "Not now." The beeping machines, the hurried voices, it all felt distant, like a blur. Ashley barely noticed as the nurses adjusted the stirrups. All she could focus on was the empty space beside her. "Where are you, Brendan?" she whispered. Her breath hitched, another contraction tearing through her. She groaned, her body demanding relief. "Ashley," one of the nurses urged, "you need to push." But she shook her head violently. "I can't. Not yet." Then, just as she thought she couldn't take it anymore, the door burst open. "Brendan." Ashley gasped, relief washing over her. He rushed to her side, grabbing her hand, his face a mixture of guilt and purpose. "Honey, I'm so sorry," he said quickly, his grip tightening around hers. But there was something very important that needed to happen, something that couldn't wait. Ashley stared at him, her face red from exertion. She was happy that he was here, but a part of her was also furious. But the pain and urgency of labor drowned out her anger. "I'll deal with you later," she huffed, wincing as another contraction rocked her body. Brendan gave a weak smile, knowing she meant it. Across the room, Dr. Owen turned from his table of tools, his calm expression unwavering. "Ah, Mr. Lawson," he said smoothly, stepping closer. "I'm glad you made it." His eyes flickered with something unreadable. Brendan forced himself to stay composed, though every instinct told him this man was dangerous. Ashley barely registered the tension between them. She was too exhausted, too focused on the life about to come into the world. Dr. Owen pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "Are you ready to push?" he asked, his voice steady. Ashley nodded weakly, gripping Brendan's hand like a lifeline. Brendan swallowed hard. He had to be here for his wife first. Play along, he thought to himself. He had to act normal. Had to pretend he knew nothing. If Dr. Owen suspected anything, he might back out, slip away. No, Brendan needed to keep him right here. The plan was already in motion. "I'm glad you could make it," Dr. Owen said again, giving Brendan a pointed look. Brendan forced a smile, careful to hide his disgust. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied smoothly. He couldn't let the doctor see the truth, not yet, not until it was too late for him to escape. Dr. Owen turned his attention back to Ashley, gesturing for the nurses to prepare. Brendan exhaled slowly, his pulse steadying. The other families were on their way. Soon the truth would be revealed, but for now, he had one job: to be the husband Ashley needed to see this moment through. Ashley took a shaky breath, her body trembling from exhaustion. "Brendan," she murmured, squeezing his hand. He leaned in close. "I'm here," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. Whatever was happening outside this room, this was the most important thing right now. Their baby was coming. Dr. Owen positioned himself at the foot of the bed, nodding to the nurses. "All right, Ashley," he said, his voice professional and calm. "On the next contraction, I need you to push." Ashley nodded weakly, bracing herself. Brendan stayed by her side, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on her hand. Dr. Owen glanced at Brendan once more, his gaze lingering just a second too long. Brendan held his fake polite smile, keeping his expression unreadable. He couldn't let his emotions betray him. Not yet. The plan was in motion, and soon Dr. Owen would finally be exposed. Ashley let out one final cry as the last contraction ripped through her. Brendan held her hand, and then, after all that waiting, a newborn's cry filled the room. Relief flooded Ashley's face as she collapsed against the pillow. "She's here," Brendan whispered, his throat tight with emotion. The nurses quickly stepped in, wiping down their tiny daughter and checking her vitals. Ashley was breathless, tears streaming down her face as she weakly reached for the baby. But before she could hold her, Dr. Owen moved forward, slipping his hands under the newborn with practiced ease. His grip was steady, almost too sure. Brendan stiffened immediately. He had been waiting for this moment, watching the doctor cradle their child. Something inside him snapped. His body tensed, and his voice came out sharp, unyielding. "Stay away from our child," he ordered. The room went silent. "Give her here. I don't want you anywhere near her." Dr. Owens looked up, his expression momentarily unreadable. The nurses froze, shifting uncomfortably. Ashley turned to Brendan, confusion flashing across her exhausted face. "Brendan," she breathed, her voice hoarse. "What are you talking about?" She barely had the strength to process what was happening, but her husband's tone was unmistakable. Brendan's hands curled into fists. He had no time to explain, no time to tell Ashley about the note, about everything he had uncovered. His eyes burned into Dr. Owens, his jaw tightening. "Give me my daughter." Each word was laced with venom. The doctor hesitated. He was starting to notice that Brendan was planning something. Ashley's breathing grew uneven. "Brendan, please," she whispered. "What's wrong? What's going on?" Her body was weak, but her mind fought to understand. She looked between her husband and the doctor, completely unaware of the storm that had been building outside this delivery room. Brendan didn't break eye contact with Dr. Owen. Dr. Owen took a slow breath, his composed mask slipping for the briefest second. "Mr. Lawson, I assure you, your baby is perfectly healthy," he said calmly, his voice measured. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something unspoken. Something Brendan saw clearly. Guilt, fear, recognition. Brendan shook his head. "I know she's healthy, that's not why I'm mad," he spat. His patience was gone. He reached forward, hands firm but careful, and took his daughter from the doctor's grasp. The moment she was in his arms, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She was safe. Dr. Owen exhaled, his lips pressing into a thin line. "Mr. Lawson, I don't understand the hostility," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Brendan glared at him, shaking his head. "You will," he muttered. And just then the door swung open with a force that silenced the entire room. Over a dozen people entered, parents, mothers, and fathers with children clinging to their sides. Babies, toddlers, each one a reminder of the doctor's actions. Dr. Owen's expression changed instantly. His body stiffened, his jaw locked. He recognized them. The moment he did, nerves flashed across his face. They were here for him. Ashley's eyes widened as she looked at the crowd that had suddenly filled the delivery room. "What is this?" she whispered, looking at Brendan for answers. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring straight at Dr. Owen, waiting, watching, challenging. The doctor's fingers twitched at his sides. The tension in the room was suffocating. A young mother stepped forward, clutching a baby against her chest. Her face was pale, but her voice was strong. "You thought we wouldn't come back," she said coldly. "You thought you could hide forever." Dr. Owen's face paled, but he remained silent. Another father stepped beside her, his jaw clenched. "You stole from us," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You lied, manipulated. But it ends today." The murmurs among the parents grew. Their children were too young to understand, unaware of the weight of this moment. But the adults knew. They had waited for this. Brendan stood there, gripping his daughter protectively. "You've ruined lives, Dr. Owen," he said, his voice steady. "You preyed on people when they were most vulnerable, but you're done." The doctor swallowed, shifting his weight slightly. For the first time, he looked trapped. And then Dana stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "There's nowhere to go, Dr. Owen," she said firmly. After Dana spoke those words, two police officers stepped forward from behind the crowd, their presence commanding the room. The parents parted, allowing them through. Dr. Owen took a step back, his hands twitching at his sides, but there was nowhere to run. One of the officers pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Dr. Owen, you're under arrest." Ashley gasped, still weak from labor. "What is going on?" she demanded, her voice trembling. She looked from the officers to Brendan, desperate for answers. "Why are the police here? What are they talking about?" Brendan reached into his back pocket and pulled out the folded note. His hand shook slightly as he handed it to Ashley. "Read this," he said quietly. Ashley frowned, then took the paper with unsteady fingers. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words. As she read them aloud, her voice broke. "Congratulations with your baby girl," Ashley whispered. "But know that she will never be yours. Because I am her biological father." A thick silence filled the room. Ashley blinked, reading the words again as if hoping they would change. "What?" she breathed, looking up at Brendan, her face drained of color. Her breath grew shallow. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "How is this possible?" "I never," she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Tears welled in her eyes. "I never cheated on you, Brendan." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I would never do that. You have to believe me." Brendan crouched beside her, gripping her hand. "I know," he said firmly. "At first I didn't. I freaked out. I thought maybe it was an affair." His throat tightened. "But then I searched my heart. I knew you would never do this." He squeezed her hand. "And that's when I found the truth." Ashley's mind spun, trying to process his words. "The truth," she whispered. She looked at the crowd of parents, at the police officers, at Dr. Owen, his face now eerily blank. "Brendan, what truth?" Her stomach twisted, fear pooling in her chest. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Brendan swallowed hard, his grip on their daughter tightening. "Dr. Owen didn't just target us," he said. "He made many victims, families who couldn't have children naturally." He took a steadying breath. Instead of using the father's DNA during IVF, he used his own. He made himself the biological father of all these children. Ashley let out a shaky breath, her fingers trembling against the hospital blanket. "No," she whispered. "That can't be true." But looking at the faces around her, the sorrow in their eyes, the pain in their posture, she knew. Her chest heaved as a tear slid down her cheek. "Oh my God." One of the police officers stepped forward, holding up a file. "We have proof," he said. "Matching DNA tests, conversations between Dr. Owen and victimized parents. Families have been trying to expose him for years. We finally have enough evidence to make an arrest." He locked eyes with the doctor. "You're done." Dr. Owen didn't understand how they got his DNA and asked about it. That's when Dana explained that she followed him on his coffee run one morning, picking his used cup from a trash can and gathering his DNA from it. She smiled, knowing she had bested him. His expression was painfully clear. He knew he had lost. But still there was something in his eyes, a flicker of defiance, a twisted sense of accomplishment. He was these children's father, and nothing could change that. That's when Brendan addressed him. "You left all these people notes, didn't you?" Brendan's voice was cold. The note was a sick way to remind them of what you did, of your control. Brendan stepped closer. "You weren't even trying to hide it," he said, his voice filled with disgust. "You wanted them to know, but you will never be my baby girl's father." His grip tightened around his daughter protectively. The officers grabbed Dr. Owen's wrists, snapping the handcuffs around them with a loud click. The parents in the room didn't cheer, didn't celebrate. Instead, they stood in quiet solidarity. They had waited for this moment for years, but it didn't erase the pain. Their children had been taken from them before they were even born. Ashley wiped her tears, her body weak, but her spirit slowly returning. She turned to Brendan, her gaze filled with gratitude and heartbreak. "You saved us," she whispered. Brendan shook his head. "No," he said softly. "We all saved each other." He looked down at his daughter. "And she will only ever know us." Brendan turned back to Dr. Owen, his voice steady, unshaken. "You will never be her father," he said. The words cut through the silence like a blade. Dr. Owen held his gaze, but this time he had no words left. He had lost. And Brendan had won. Brendan's grip on his daughter tightened as he looked at Dr. Owen one last time. "She may not be mine by blood," he said, his voice unwavering, "but she is our daughter, and I will love her just the same. You will never be part of her life. You are nothing to her." The officers began leading Dr. Owen toward the door. He didn't resist, didn't fight. He knew it was over. The families watched in silence as he was escorted away, his white coat no longer a symbol of trust, but a reminder of the lives he had manipulated. He was going away for a very long time. Ashley still struggled to believe what had happened. The betrayal, the deception, it was too much to process all at once. But through it all, Brendan never wavered. He held her hand, comforted her, reassured her that none of this changed what truly mattered. They were a family and nothing could take that away. Any doubts Brendan once had about being a father vanished the moment he looked into his daughter's eyes. She was perfect. His heart swelled with love as he traced her tiny fingers with his own. "Sarah," Ashley whispered, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "Her name is Sarah." Despite everything, there was a silver lining. Sarah had not only the most loving parents in Ashley and Brendan, but she also had something unexpected: 18 half-siblings. It was a bizarre connection, but instead of letting it haunt them, the families embraced it. They decided to stay in close contact, ensuring their children knew each other. Over time, those connections turned into something beautiful. The children grew up knowing they weren't alone, that they shared something special. Some became close friends, others like family. What started as a tragedy became a bond that could never be broken. And through it all, Sarah always knew one thing for certain: she was loved.